Chapter 15. In the time it took her to mostly cover herself with the mercenary's body, the two agents of unknown affiliation had pulled out their own suppressed pistols. The caliber of their guns was higher than his and would create more noise and a larger impact wound. However, that only mattered if you planned on getting hit in a vulnerable spot. A bullet from his .22 caliber pistol would kill just as easily as the 9mm they were packing if you were hit in one of those places. For several long seconds there was a tense standoff, and then the first man, the one who had cracked his neck, pulled the trigger. The shot hit Rip square in the chest and robbed him of his breath. The bulletproof vest had done exactly what he had hoped it would, but damn, his ribs hurt. They might not have been broken, but they were certainly going to be bruised for a solid week after that single shot. His aim was slightly off due to a lack of air, but he was still able to squeeze off several rapid shots at both men before falling to his knees. The pistol clicked empty as he ejected the spent magazine and slammed in a fresh one from his back pocket. He had just sent 6 shots at the two men, and he had no idea how many of them had even hit them. A groan burst from his lips as he took in a shuddering breath. "What are you even firing, pellets?" Rip looked up in time to see both spies wiping the bullets off their chests. They were both wearing the same type of bulletproof shirt he had borrowed from Jesse earlier. That meant he was going to need to be very careful with where he aimed. If they could make a proper-looking shirt out of that material, it wasn't a stretch to imagine they might be able to make pants as well. Actually, it was. The material hadn't been stretchy or breathable in the slightest. It would make terrible pants. There were fresh holes in their button-up shirts and suit jackets, otherwise they were completely unharmed. This was where the small caliber of his gun was showing its downside. He could feel their bullets even through his bulletproof vest, and while he had no doubt they felt the .22 caliber bullets, it wasn't to the same degree. It was great if he was trying to be silent, but once the target was aware of him, that became slightly less important. It was a problem he would need to think over after this was over. He knew without a doubt that this wouldn't be the last time something like this happened. They had been pulled into the life, and it wasn't going to let them go. Jesse would need to let the different agencies know what had happened to stay on their good side. That meant Nathan would find out at some point. Then there was the issue Max had created. All of it meant their lives were going to be very different once they returned. Of course, all of that was contingent on them surviving this encounter first. He dove to the side and madly scrambled his way behind the bed. The two men fired at the mattress, their subsonic bullets occasionally getting tangled with the springs inside. The rest pierced through the fluffing like it was nothing, and got stuck in the thick wood paneling that had been used to lift it all off the ground. Rip felt a few whiz past where he was lying flat on the ground, but through it all, he remained remarkably unscathed. It was a chance he knew he was unlikely to get a second time. As soon as they realized what had happened, they would correct it. He waited for the lull and popped up to shoot. These men were trained, and while one was reloading, the other still had a few rounds left in his magazine. All of which he promptly emptied into Rip's chest. From underneath her protective corpse, Ashley screamed as she saw him stumble back. For his part, Rip was feeling more alive than he had in years. The pain coursing out from the battered bones of his chest was sending a surge of adrenaline through his body. It cleared his mind in an instant and allowed him to snap his pistol back into position. He fired repeatedly from the hip, unable to take the time to properly aim as he stumbled back into the wall near the bed. A fresh bloom of pain burst from his ribs as the bulletproof vest suddenly felt far too tight and restrictive against his chest. It was making it hard to get his breath, and he could already feel his body wanting to hyperventilate. It was a reaction he had to ignore. Taking off the vest in this situation was a death sentence. He had seen child soldiers who did that in the past get ripped to shreds by bullets. You never took off the vest while you were still in combat. Across from him, the man who had shot him slumped to the ground, dead. He had taken a bullet straight through the eye, and it had blown out the back of the man's head. He was as dead as they came. It was unfortunate that he wouldn't be answering any questions they had. It was a mistake to ever aim that high in the first place. He would need to be more careful with the other man. The second man, who had been reloading, had finished the quick process. It was his chance to finish Rip off, and he would have been able to do it too if Ashley hadn't intervened. When she had seen him get shot, she had scrambled out from beneath the body. Then, with her baton in hand, she proceeded to lay into the surviving operator. His arms, wrists, and one of his legs were all broken before she decided to finally come up for air. He was still alive though, which was really all that Rip cared about. "You done?" Rip croaked out painfully from his place on the floor when she finally stopped beating the man into submission. She looked at her bent, no longer telescoping baton and nodded. "Yeah, I needed that." I didn't get to take it out on the other guys, but this worked. She rushed over to him and carefully opened his shirt and vest. How are you doing? Not sure. He shifted positions with a pained grunt. I think one of the bullets went through my side where I wasn't covered. That will need to be stitched and covered with gauze. As for my chest. He hesitated. Parts of my chest are numb right now, which isn't good, so I can't tell if anything is broken or just really badly bruised. He stopped her from fully taking off the vest for the moment. The support it provided to his chest hurt, but depending on how bad the damage actually was, it might also be what was keeping him alert and conscious. This was going to make everything from here on out much more difficult. Ashley would need to do all of the heavy lifting. He would be pretty much useless in his current state. That also meant their current options for getting rid of the bodies were going to be very limited. Rip picked up his pistol and looked at his girlfriend with steady eyes. Wake him up. Let's get as many questions answered from him as we can. Getting rid of the bodies and making our way back to our rooms is going to take a while with me in this state. She nodded and got a cup of water from the sink in the bathroom. It was too late for her to say anything about right or wrong. This was the path they were on, and they had been forced onto it by these people coming after her. Besides, she wanted answers about why her family had been targeted as well. Ashley splashed the water onto the man's face, who came around with a pained groan. Each twitch he made came with another spasm and a curse or cry of pain. Rip let the man suffer for a moment. Kick him. He ordered her. Ashley gingerly nudged the man with her shoe. It was the sort of tap you might give a baby to help them turn over. However, in this case, it was enough. In his damaged and overly sensitive state, the man went rigid, his veins popping out as he began to breathe rapidly. Here is how this conversation is going to work, Rip told the hyperventilating man, knowing all he could do at the moment was breathe and listen. I am going to ask you a question, and you will answer the question. If you don't, she will kick you, and if she doesn't, then I will shoot you somewhere. Make sure to keep your answers as truthful as possible. There are still several hours left before this boat reaches the mainland. I'm sure I don't need to spell things out for you, do I? The man shook his head with an angry snarl, his entire face red from the pain. Good, now let's start with an easy question. What agency are the two of you with? We were with what you Americans would call a non-existent black ops unit within the General Intelligence Presidency. Ashley's brows rose as she looked closer at the man. You don't look Arab. Rip looked at her in surprise, wondering why she knew which country that agency belonged to. And just how exactly is an Arab supposed to look? He snapped. Why is the GIP, or some no-name black ops section of it, getting involved with terrorists? Rip asked, refocusing the conversation. They were a means to an end, nothing more. I felt unclean just dealing with them. I have a squad on standby at the mainland that was meant to eliminate this entire despicable mercenary group when we arrived. His eyes shone with an inner fervor that Rip never enjoyed seeing. It was the mark of a zealot, someone who believed in a cause greater than themselves and was willing to die for it. Why drag her family into all of this? What are you people really after? The company her family owns has made some recent breakthroughs and created a rather fascinating piece of technology. That is all I know. The specifics are above my pay grade. He panted and squeezed his eyes shut as the pain flared. Rip asked him a few more questions before coming to the final one. Where did you get those armored shirts? My understanding is that they're still experimental. The agent laughed, though it was immediately cut short with a grimace. They are, but the maker doesn't belong to any country. No one knows who they are. Certain agencies and countries would love to claim it as theirs, and many have. The truth is, we have no idea who is making them or how. It's become one of the greatest secrets in our particular community. Everyone wants to know who the creator is. He sank to the floor, completely relaxed, as though knowing his time had come and was fine with it. Not one to betray expectations, Rip raised his pistol and shot the man in the head, ending his life as quickly and painlessly as he could. He deserved that much for answering their questions. Ashley looked away, but didn't say anything. Chapter 16. We need to get both of their armored shirts, along with any money and identification they had on them. If they have room cards, then even better, we can grab the items from their rooms as well. Rip told her in bursts, as he turned over onto his chest and slowly inched himself up to his knees. It was a painful process, but he refused to be useless. Besides, he had been through worse. It was simply a matter of getting to the point where you could push past it. There was work to be done, and a very limited amount of time in which to do it all. Blood from the hole in his side spurted out as he pushed himself. He had actually forgotten about the bullet hole for a few moments. There was so much wrong with his chest at this point that there was too much fighting for his attention. Not to mention, a large part of his chest had simply gone alarmingly numb. It was nice, but it was also a sign of how badly he had been hurt. Pulling the sheet from the bed, he grabbed the bloody knife the mercenary leader had used to slit his own throat with. Every move he made sent a stab of burning pain through his chest, making his legs tremble and go weak at the knees. He quickly wiped off the blade and cut the sheet into strips. Until they got back to the mainland and some place where there was needle, thread, and gauze, the sheet and binding his chest would have to do. It wasn't his preferred method. It wasn't even a particularly good way of handling the injury, but it was what they had on hand. He'd been forced to do worse as a kid. They had used anything and everything that was available to survive back then. That meant nothing was off limits: common staples, superglue, a heating element from a curling iron, and pastes made from whatever they had on hand. Even now, he considered it a miracle that he had survived some of those things. Ashley did her best to not pay attention to what he was doing, while she searched each of the men and removed the 2 armored shirts. Suddenly, each of his scars was taking on a whole new meaning for her. Before, they had simply been a curiosity, a story that told of how cruel his home life had been. Something that wasn't meant to be pried into, and she had respected that. Now, each of those scars had taken on an entirely different, darker meaning to her, the results of which were now lying dead on the floor. She didn't regret their deaths, not after everything they had done to her and her father and Rip, but it was causing a severe shift in how she thought. One that would take some time to finish settling into place. Rip hissed as he finished pulling off the vest, and then lifted up the shirt he had been wearing underneath it. The bullet hole was beginning to bleed faster, as all the pressure that had been keeping it somewhat closed vanished. Ashley, he ground out, his fists clenched as tightly together as he could manage, his fingernails creating grooves in his nearly bloodless hands. I'm going to need your help with this part. I won't be able to get the sheet strips tight enough on my own. Please? She hurried over and knelt in front of him. You don't need to make it sound like it is some kind of a big deal for me to help you, Rip. I've come this far with you. I'm not going to abandon you now. I said I needed some time to think about everything, not that we were breaking up or that I wanted you to go and die. I'm not some overly emotional idiot like you see in the movies. She told him while tugging the first of the strips a little tighter than she needed to. He grunted in pain as his chest flexed and his throat momentarily rebelled. And yet something tells me you're holding a grudge, he said weakly. What would ever give you that idea? She replied sweetly. Ashley made sure that the entrance and exit wounds had plenty of extra sheet material to soak up the blood. Binding his entire chest was an exercise in pain, but by the end he felt it was safe to say that nothing was broken. Deeply bruised, down to the bone most definitely, but not broken. He had gotten somewhat lucky in that regard. The bruises would heal slightly faster than a broken rib, but honestly, the pain would be about the same for the first week or so. At least, that had been his experience in the past. After she had finished wrapping him as best she could, he put his shirt back on along with the bulletproof vest. It was one more layer of stability and pressure on his chest. It hurt, but the pain was also helping to keep his mind clear at the moment. The key was to strike a balance between the pain and where it was helpful. You couldn't go overboard by having it too loose, or it would become detrimental. You also couldn't make anything too tight, or you wouldn't be able to breathe. Balance, it was the key to many things in life. Tip too far in one direction, and suddenly everything is out of whack. Rip carefully stood off the bed and went to the large window of the room. Unlike the small porthole in their room, the suite rooms came with large windows that could be opened. It was going to make getting rid of the bodies considerably easier than he had initially been expecting. They would still need to weigh them down, but at least they wouldn't need to chop them up and stuff them into suitcases. That had been one of the possibilities he had come up with. It hadn't been his favorite, but it was there. They would have needed to drag the suitcases through the interior of the boat and onto the deck where they could then toss them overboard. All without being seen by anyone other than the cameras. It would have been a stretch, not to mention what it would have done to Ashley's psyche. No, he was glad they had a better option at their disposal. He opened the window as wide as it would go and poked his head out, looking down. He needed to make sure there wasn't a net of some sort to catch people in case they fell. There was one above them, but not on the level of the rooms. They were in the clear. Ashley had finished searching the 4 men for anything useful or valuable and set it to the side. A small pile of wallets, watches, and various weapons had been created. Did you check inside their shoes or the lining of their jackets? Rip asked her, walking stiffly over to the first spy he had killed. Ashley had removed the man's suit jacket to get at the bulletproof shirt he had been wearing. Carefully, and with a painful suck-in of his breath, he knelt down next to the man and began to run his hands over everything he was wearing. It was unpleasant, considering he was effectively feeling up a dead man, but it needed to be done. He pulled off the man's belt and flipped it over. The side that would have been hidden was one long zippered pouch. He also found a small lockpick set inside the hidden pocket of the man's suit jacket. It wasn't much, but the items were enough to help an experienced operative escape, he imagined. He showed them to Ashley, who quickly retrieved the same from the second man, along with a roll of bills from the false heel of his shoe. Is there anything good in the mercenary's luggage? He asked, straining to drag the man over to the window. The pull against his chest was terrible, and he knew he was pushing it, but he refused to stop just yet. There is no luggage that I can see. How did they get their weapons on board then? Rip asked. A perk of having a suite and coming on early? Maybe they weren't searched. Ashley suggested with a shrug. Well, whatever. I had wanted to weigh the bodies down with something, but I guess that won't be an option. Help me push them through the window. Then we'll do some basic cleanup, gather up the items, and get what we can from the agent's room. Luckily for them, among the belongings they had taken from the two men was a room key in a paper sleeve with the room number scrawled on it. Rather sloppy for an operative, but who were they to complain? The sound of the bodies hitting the water was lost to the roaring of the waves and engines. No alarms were sounded, and soon they were well beyond where they had been dumped. In the dark, no one had seen anything. Let's do some basic cleanup of the blood and other stuff. We don't want anyone to find our DNA when they come through later. Get the soap and water, we'll mix it all together. Make sure all the surfaces we might possibly have touched are wiped down as well. Rip ordered, as he began picking up all the expended cartridge brass and tossing it out the window. Chapter 17. Rip was sweating heavily as they walked through the hall to the room the GIP agents had rented for the short trip. He knew he was overdoing it, and his body was protesting heavily at the abuse. Ashley's purse was bulging with everything they had stuffed into it before leaving the room. She was holding it in front of her, while also supporting a large portion of his weight as he leaned against her. You're burning up, Rip. She hissed as her forehead touched his sweaty cheek. Are you absolutely sure nothing is broken? He nodded weakly. Yeah, it's just shock. It acts a lot like a fever. Once it starts to wear off, I'll get the shakes and get cold. As soon as we get back to our cabin, I'll need to be wrapped in blankets and kept warm. For now, walking around and forcing the blood to move throughout my body is the best thing I can do. She nodded slowly, unsure if what he was saying was true or merely a smoke show to calm her down. All right, I'll trust you to know what's best for your body. You are the one who's been in these situations before. She couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from creeping into her voice. Sorry, you didn't deserve that. I understand why you didn't tell me. I really do, it's just... Emotionally, you want to strangle me. He finished for her. I know. Emotions rarely follow logic. If you need to take out your frustrations on me later in a boxing ring, that's fine with me. Just wait until I'm healed, please. She chuckled and pulled the keycard for the room from her pocket as they neared it. As she pushed it open, Rip noticed a small string that had been taped across the entryway fall away. It was the oldest trick in the book. If the spies had returned and found the string on the ground, then they would know someone had entered their room. If instead they were the ones who saw it fall, then they would know no one had entered. It was old-school spycraft, but that didn't mean it was ineffective. The inside of the room was immaculate, save for the two suitcases that were standing at the foot of the beds. Ashley and Rip took a couple of minutes to make sure there was nothing else hiding anywhere. After determining that there wasn't, they grabbed both suitcases and calmly wheeled them out. As soon as they were back in their room, Rip collapsed on the bed, panting. Ashley dug through her luggage and pulled out her toiletry bag. She occasionally had really bad cramps during her period, and her birth control pills did nothing for them. Buried at the bottom of her bag was a bottle of pain relief pills for whenever they got really bad. She shook a couple of the pills out into her hand and gave them to Rip, along with some water. Thanks, he said weakly after swallowing them down along with half a bottle of water. I hate to use your meds like that, though. She shrugged and lifted both suitcases onto the bed next to him. With any luck, we'll be home before my next period, and if we're not and I've run out, you can just pamper me, you've done it before. He laughed and winced. Don't make me laugh. The last time you made me do that, I thought you had turned into some kind of monster. The constant demands for foot and back rubs. The trip to the store for ice cream, then holding you in the tub when the cramps got even worse. He reached and stroked her fingers. We have a lot of memories together, Ashley. And we're not done making them either. I'm not breaking up with you. You are not breaking up with me, and that little injury is nothing serious. She took hold of his hand and looked him in the eye. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am. If I see a scary man with a scythe, I will tell him to talk to you first. He winked and kissed her fingers. That's not what I was getting at, but I'm glad to know that our relationship is safe after all of this. You and Nathan are all the family I have left. Rip sighed. No, I know it came out wrong, but I was just commenting on how many memories we have together. We've been through a lot ever since we were introduced. At times, it amazes me that we clicked as well as we did. That we realized what we had was worth working for back then. That's all I wanted to say. You're more romantic than you look, Rip. Inside that scarred chest of yours is a very squishy marshmallow-like heart. And I completely agree with everything you said. She finished softly as she leaned over and tenderly kissed him, the touch of their lips lingering together. Her forehead pressed against his for another couple of seconds before they separated. Now, let's see what is inside these suitcases, Rip said after another moment, using his elbows to scoot up against the headboard and leverage himself into a sitting position. It was still painful, but with the backing there and the pillows behind his back, most of the pressure was off the worst spots. The hardshell cases both had a 3-digit combination lock on them that had been left in the open position. Not that it would have helped anyway. Cracking those was usually an effort that took a matter of minutes. She swung open the lid on the first one. It was full of clothes. Ashley carefully moved them to the side. Underneath them was a decent stack of money and an extra magazine for a pistol. There was nothing else of obvious interest. Check the linings. It's a hard-shell suitcase. Placing something right up against the shell would be a perfect place to hide something. Rip told her, straining his neck to see everything. She felt along the edges, and then all of the top. A look of concentration took over her face as she noticed something off, but couldn't place what it was. I think there might be something here, but I'm not sure. It just feels different from what I was expecting. She clearly wasn't sure of what had caught her attention either. Bring it closer to me. I'll look at it while you check out the other one. She pushed the lid onto his lap where he could easily reach it and opened the second suitcase. It was the same as the other one, in that it was full of clothes with some money and an extra magazine buried underneath. Rip felt the inside lid of the suitcase and smiled at her. He knew what had caught her attention. The outside of the suitcase had some slight ribbing on the shell. However, he wasn't feeling any of those at the moment. Even if there had been some padding, he still should have been able to feel them. That could only mean one thing. The suitcase had a false top. It's got a false top. It's too smooth. He told Ashley, while his fingers felt along the edges for some method to pull it apart. I'm not sure how to open it without destroying the suitcase though. He wasn't particularly concerned about the cases surviving so much as he was annoyed at not being able to find the method they used. Tugging on the lid, he brought the entire suitcase closer and looked at it closely. There, buried up against the seam of the case, was a strip of Velcro. He had to get his fingernail into it just right to pull it down, and even then, he found that there were additional strips running along the case as well. The secondary strips were meant to keep the interior tight, as though it was still glued into place instead of loose. Pulling it all loose was much harder than he originally expected with his injuries, hindering his ability to put any real strength into his arm. After a moment, Ashley took it away from him and just ripped it open herself. Let me do it, she told him somewhat belatedly. Pressed against the top lid was a large manila envelope. She handed the envelope to Rip and hurried to the second suitcase and quickly had a second envelope revealed. Inside the first were several documents written in Arabic. Luckily, the translation function on their phones that used the camera could work with the language. At least it could once they had any sort of signal on them again. Rip stuffed the documents back into the envelope and placed it to the side for later. The second envelope was of a more immediate and somewhat concerning nature for them. It was full of photos of them both, mainly of Ashley, but there were a few of Rip as well. They had been taken before they ever left on the trip, which meant someone had been following them for at least a few days before they left. The photo in Rip's hand crumbled into a ball as he realized just how complacent he had become. A few years earlier, he was constantly looking over his shoulder, convinced that someone was going to take him away again. That fear had slowly faded as he had gotten older. People didn't generally kidnap teens. Instead, it was replaced with a new fear of what they might do to him if they ever found him. Thankfully, Nathan had been there to help, and then Ashley had come along as well. He had begun to relax. It was a gradual process, but it had been there. Now he wasn't so sure it had been a good thing. Chapter 18. Rip felt his eyes beginning to droop as Ashley opened the first of the belts. There were a couple of small tools, some money, and a tiny GPS transmitter that was hooked to a simple switch. If the men had ever gotten captured but still had their belts, they would have been able to flip the switch even while wearing the belt. It was a nice design on their part, he thought, but they couldn't risk it getting activated by accident. Tear that out and break it into pieces under your shoe. Then flush it when you're done, he told Ashley somewhat blearily, unsure if his words were even coherent. His eyes flickered closed, unable to remain open any longer. The mix of his body relaxing, as the meds from Ashley kicked in, and the stress of the last few hours suddenly came to a head and knocked him out. After doing as he had asked in regard to the tracker, she yawned and took off her shoes. Ashley crawled onto the bed and carefully pressed herself against his side, the one that didn't currently have a hole in it. He wasn't the only one who had thought the last few hours had been beyond stressful and emotionally terrifying. She was exhausted, and she had been the captive and then party to events that she would have never even normally considered before. She carefully kissed his cheek and then curled up next to him. Ashley was dead to the world before her head ever even hit the pillow. The horn of the ship approaching the harbor on the mainland woke them both up from their naps with a start. Rip felt as though he had been run over by a truck, and not one of the fun ones that took you to another world. Everything was stiff and hurt to move, and in his current condition, he couldn't even stretch out his body properly. He watched enviously as Ashley stretched out beside him. Together, they quickly stuffed everything they wanted to keep into their suitcases. Everything else went into the 2 hardshell suitcases they had taken from the GIP operatives. They would be bringing the cases off the boat with them, and keeping them, at least until they could find a decent place to toss them. The bulletproof vest Rip had been wearing also went in one of the spare suitcases. From here on out, he and Ashley would both be wearing the armored shirts they had taken from the spies instead. They were much less visible than the vest, and could be worn under their normal clothes. Rip cleaned himself up with a hot towel while Ashley showered, and after getting some help from her on the places he could no longer reach, they changed and left the room. There were a few spots of blood on the sheets, but nothing too conspicuous. Regardless, he made sure to foul up any DNA traces before they left. They kept their heads down as they joined the crowd of people disembarking, and walked off the boat without a problem. Off to the side, they saw the group that was meant to deal with the mercenaries waiting in the shadows of a nearby building. Rip did his best to walk normally and act like he wasn't injured. A short while later, they were waving down a tuk-tuk and on their way to a hotel near the Lombok International Airport. They would rest up there and change the date of the return flight on their tickets to as soon as possible. As soon as they had a date confirmed, they would need to ditch all of the weapons they had gathered. There was no way they would be able to bring those items with them on the plane. Thankfully, Rip had sold everything he had gathered previously to Jesse. All they needed to worry about now were the items they had taken from the men on the boat and what they had brought with them. A few guns, various magazines of ammo, knives, and a freshly ruined telescoping baton. They would be keeping all the money and the lock-picking sets. They would be buried inside their suitcases and secured so no sticky-fingered TSA agent could steal some for themselves. The documents would come with them. The ride in the tuk-tuk had been a strain on Rip's body, leaving him in a bad state once more. With the GIP people nearby, they couldn't even risk taking him to the hospital. They could only hope there wouldn't be a problem getting him on board the plane. Safe inside their hotel room, they both pulled out their cell phones and turned them on for the first time in hours. There had been no reception out on the water, so they had seen no point in leaving them on and wasting battery. Immediately, they both began to ring with a deluge of incoming messages. Ashley's had several dozen messages from her father. Meanwhile, Rip had a few from Max himself, a couple from Nathan, and several from numbers that he didn't recognize. Ashley listened to the messages from her father, her face becoming more distressed with each voicemail she listened to. While she was busy doing that, Rip read his own messages. The messages from Max were worrying, to say the least. In the span of a few hours, everything had gone to shit for the man. According to him, shortly after he had paid the ransom, the feds had gotten an anonymous tip that he had sent money to terrorists. No matter how he had tried to explain the situation to them, they hadn't listened. Which was typical of any investigative agency, in Rip's opinion. Once they came to their own conclusions, right or wrong, nothing could make them change it. Facts didn't matter at that point, and they would be more than happy to even bury facts that didn't support their own conclusion. He had seen it happen before, and Nathan had told him dozens of stories as well. To say he had a healthy skepticism that the establishment would do their jobs correctly was the understatement of the century. Moving on to the text from Nathan, he was unsurprised to find it encrypted. He had told Ashley earlier that the man used to be a diplomat or operative. The truth was, he didn't think Nathan had retired from that work in the slightest. Not with how often he was gone, and little details like this. It wasn't a simple matter of him moonlighting every once in a while either. Nathan had simply straight up never retired. They might have moved him to a different section in whatever lettered agency he was a part of, but that was it. Reaching over to the nightstand, he began exchanging the numbers for letters in the pre-arranged cipher they had designed years earlier. After that was completed, he shifted every letter over according to the number the text began with. It kept the cipher shifting each time, but was also easy for them both to memorize. The first message from Nathan was a simple check-in that he did every few days when he was away. The second message, however, had apparently been sent after he had been notified of Rip's situation. It wasn't filled with the usual advice someone would expect to receive from a mentor. Nathan knew Rip already knew most of that advice already. Instead, he chose to highlight a few things and then gave him the real advice at the end. Don't be afraid to run. Forget that BS Hollywood likes to spew about only the guilty run. Everyone runs. It is our instinct as a race, and they know that. So, in that vein, don't be afraid to shake things up and simply hide instead. You are not a trained operative, don't try to act like one. You are not meant for a life of deep covers and endless lies. However, you do have the disposition to be a decent assassin or WetWork operative. After this, I have no doubt the different lettered agencies will be approaching you when you return. Choose who you work with carefully. This leads into my last point. Rip, these people will promise you everything. Their words will be gilded with gold. You cannot believe anything they say, even their contracts are worthless. They are the government, they make the rules. If they decide the contract is invalid, then that is the case. Go with your gut and keep your interactions to a minimum, no matter what. Do not work with any of the agency climbers directly if you can help it. Your life will get messy if you do. One extra as a freebie, document and record everything, and never let them know what you are doing. Make hard copies and keep them at different sites. Records will prove your version of the story if you are ever called before a tribunal. Auto-record everything on your phone and take pictures constantly. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Be careful until then. Nathan. In some ways, it was a typical message from the man, in others, it was anything but. He could practically feel the worry exuding from the typed words. He knew Nathan cared for him. After all the time they had spent together, their relationship had evolved into one resembling a nephew and a particularly close uncle. Ostensibly, he was his foster father. However, Nathan had been smart enough to not try and take that position with such a younger, problematic Rip. They might not always say the words, but at this point, they were family. He closed and erased the messages. Then shredded the sheets of notepad paper he had used, along with the next couple immediately underneath. There would be no recovering the message by tracing the pad of paper by the next room's inhabitant. It was a long ingrained habit from Nathan that he had given up on questioning years ago. It didn't matter if anyone was actually going to look for or try to read the message. It was now part of his standard operating procedure, SOP, for daily life. The messages he had gotten from the unknown numbers were all mostly the same. They had been notified of the situation by the local plumber and wanted to talk to him. He was to stay in the area and not do anything to draw attention to himself before they had a chance to speak with him. Rip closed the last of the messages and frowned. He didn't particularly feel like calling any of these people, or even texting them. All he wanted to do was fly back home with Ashley. With the attention they had gathered, he suddenly wasn't even sure that was going to be possible. Everyone seemed to want to talk to him. As soon as he tried to use his passport, it would undoubtedly get flagged in the system. As for Ashley, with what her father had just done, who knew how that might have affected her? Her passport might get flagged in the system as well, just because she was Max's daughter. This is bad, Ashley said at last, tossing her phone onto the bed between them. That's putting it lightly, he said with a sigh, running a hand over his dry, rough-feeling face. We need to come up with a new plan, I think. Leaving by the international airport is out for the moment.